Hey, everybody. Welcome to our next conversation in Healing Healthcare. Today, we have two incredible guests that I'm very excited to introduce you to. Sheena will do the formal introductions as usual, and we hope everybody loves this conversation. Sheena?
All right, we are so happy to be here with you all today. First, we have Dr. Alejandro Junger. He's a cardiologist and functional medical student, open-minded doctor, New York Times bestseller, and founder of the CLEAN program. So we're so excited to hear all about that. And then we also have Dr. Deanna Minich. Dr. Deanna Minich is a PhD nutrition researcher, educator, and author who leads product development for Organic India and the CLEAN program. So we're super excited to hearing all about that as well. So Dr. Junger, we wanted to start with you. Tell us a little bit about your past and how we're meeting you today.
Hi, everybody. I'm Alejandro Junger. I'm a doctor. I was born in Uruguay in South America. And at the time when I was born, life was very simple. There were no supermarkets. Life was healthy by default. And then after going to medical school there and graduating, I moved to New York, where life was completely different. Such a drastic change that I started getting sick. And I ended up, by the end of my training in internal medicine and cardiology, I ended up suffering from irritable bowel syndrome, depression, and severe allergies. And I was prescribed 7 medications, which didn't make sense to me. So I started looking for a different solution and ended up finding incredible stuff. Amongst them is functional medicine, but also looked into Ayurvedic medicine and other systems of medicine. Ended up being able to heal my problems completely without any medications, and then embarked on a mission to really spread the word of how to approach regaining health and maintaining health without the need for medications as easy prescribed as they are these days.
Question, what is functional medicine? Because I want everybody to really understand what that means.
Deanna, you want to answer that one?
So functional medicine is a way to think about the body, a way to think about the mechanisms and the root causes of disease. So functional medicine came into being in the 1990s by Dr. Jeff Bland and his wife, Susan Bland. They started the Institute for Functional Medicine, which was based on root cause medicine, looking at individual biochemistry, and looking at the whole body as a system rather just in pieces and in parts. So much of functional medicine would resemble a lot of the ancient traditional medical systems, but it has the terminology of 21st century medicine. So we use a lot of science, we look at mechanism, and we look at a patient's timeline.
What I say is always, functional medicine is what would happen if you teach a regular doctor to think like a Chinese medicine or an Ayurvedic medicine doctor.
Or even a scientist. I think that it's so much about like understanding like the why. And many doctors can't get to the why. They don't have the time, right? But if they can understand the why, like why did the gut get like this? You know, so I think knowing a little bit of the science has been helpful for people in functional medicine as well.
And Dr. talk to me about your role in functional medicine and how you come to this place as well.
Well, my name being Deanna, rhyming with banana, I think I was destined to be in nutrition, right? Like my dad used to call me Deanna Banana when I was growing up. And I had a health nut mom. I grew up in the 1970s when it wasn't really cool to have brown bread sandwiches with crunchy peanut butter and banana. My mom didn't let me have Wonder Bread like all the other kids. She would tell me, Deanna, just tell the kids at school, the whiter the bread, the quicker you're dead. But it was traumatic. It was traumatic to eat different as a child when all of my peers were not eating this way. So I would say nutrition was the furthest thing from my mind. But I was a nerd. I was always in the books. I was hanging out at the library. This is before the internet, right? So I had encyclopedias. I was curious about my body. Why was I having all these gut issues and period issues and what was going on? Why did I have bad skin? So I thought I was going to be like Dr. Junger and go to medical school. But after working for doctors, I decided there's no way I'm going to do this. This is too intense, you know, as Ellen knows, like playing the role, right? I mean, this is a lifestyle that you have to choose, and you have to like kind of be wired to do this. And I'm not wired to do it. I didn't like that kind of life. So I went through the PhD process, and that set the stage for me to understand how the body works. And that actually helped me with thinking about clinical practice. So later I came into functional medicine through working with Dr. Jeff Bland. I started to formulate dietary supplements. I began doing clinical work and research and bringing those two things together.
So you teach a course at, or I'm sorry, what do you do at the College of Nutrition? Is that what I'm?
So I do a lot of different things within nutrition. So I'm the president of the American College of Nutrition. I'm on the board for the American Nutrition Association. And then separately, I teach for the Institute for Functional Medicine, which we're all kind of talking about this whole thing of functional medicine, right? So I teach on what Dr. Junger and I have in common is that we both have a love of detoxification. Maybe it's my Catholic upbringing, like thinking like of Lent and you got to give up something, but you know, spiritual traditions and medical traditions kind of coincide in that spirit of letting something go in your life periodically. So we both have books on detoxification, and I teach on detoxification for IFM.
And that's really, I think that's something.
And by the way, she's written a beautiful book on detoxification as well.
And what's that book called, Dr. Minich?
It's Whole Detox. So the holistic way of looking at the body through color.
Okay, and I know this is something that I'm sure that when you try to talk to people, especially Americans about this, they're like, because it's something that we're just not necessarily used to. And I know that when I speak to people that are from other countries, sometimes like Dr. Junger said, as far as like eating, it's kind of just the norm. Like you just take a mango and you eat it, you know, you just eat these things. And it's not something that's really thought about like, oh, I'm detoxing. It's just, this is our normal diet every day. And it just so happens to be healthy. So for people here in America, where, you know, it's a little bit harder to get some of these fresh fruits. Our strawberries are not as sweet as maybe in Uruguay, or, you know, our mangoes aren't as necessarily tasty as they are there. What are some recommendations that you would say that people can find healthy foods that are also good foods they can get used to and actually like? Because that's, I think, a part of the problem.
Well, you talk about Americans, right? And when you look at where do Americans get their food, where do they buy their food? And most of them buy their food in supermarkets. And when you take a bird's eye view of a supermarket, you see that 90% of the stuff that people consume as foods are not really foods. They are edible products. They come in boxes, in jars, in tubes, in cans. And in order to be in these containers, they have to have chemicals that prevent bacteria from growing in them. They call them preservatives or conservatives, right? And these chemicals then act inside of you to kill the good bacteria in your gut. But there's also other chemicals like coloring agents and smelling agents and texturizing agents. So everything that comes in these containers and has a shelf life is not really anything that was designed by nature, is not real food. So I think that going back to the basics for Americans is really important, and understanding that we are a product of nature, and nature designed us to eat and live in a certain way. We have departed from the ways of nature, and that is what's getting us sick. We are eating food-like products and not edible products for the most part. And just starting with that would make a huge difference that could have prevented this whole disaster of COVID-19 if we would have lived like that for a while before.
Alejandro, I love what you just said. And it makes me think of how even in the science, the term for these foods now is ultra processed foods. I mean, it's amazing that we're now at this level of refining and processing to the point that it's ultra. And when I think of why did Americans go down this path of fast food, it's because we live fast lives. It's like people are on the go. They want things that are going to stay stable, like you're saying, with preservatives. So I do think we need to get back to the basics. And especially during this time of the pandemic, one of the things that I think about, and of course, I always want people to strive for more plant foods, but that's not always possible, especially the fresh kind. So the two things that I think most people, regardless of their income and accessibility, can get would be herbs and spices. So think of a spice cabinet, right? Most people have at least a handful of different spices, and tea. I mean, I'm drinking tea right now. It's a concentrated form of plants, and most people have it. You look at the cultures that live the longest, they drink tea throughout the day. So those two things are shelf stable just naturally without having preservatives for the most part. Some of them do, but I think that they're wonderful things that we can all be doing throughout the year.
Right. And that's what I more so like, because I think that a lot of Americans know that our food is not necessarily food. A lot of us know that we could eat better, but then as said, we everything is so sped up. You know, a lot of us work 2 jobs just to make ends meet. A lot of us don't necessarily have the time and energy to do that. You know, I just went to the grocery store yesterday, and a container of strawberries was $8. You know, and it's just like when you're trying to eat healthy, my son loves strawberries. So that's like the main thing that I'm always buying him. But when you're trying to eat healthy and you're trying to, you know, we have Whole Foods here and different types of stores that are supposed to be healthier, but they're also so expensive. So it comes down to those tricks, like you said, like the hot tea and different ways to add those type of plant-based options into our diet. And that, you know, I think that it's amazing that you're spreading awareness on this and showing people different ways to detox. Is there a particular tea that you think helps with detox?
There are many. We wrote a literature review back in 2015, and we found that there are several teas that help in detoxification. I'm sure that Alejandro has his favorites, but in terms of the literature, rooibos, which is a reddish tea, chamomile, green tea, and even black tea like oolong teas can be helpful, especially for the allergy response. And what's really fascinating is that 1 cup of tea can rival the amount of antioxidants that you can even find in a serving of vegetables. So it's pretty significant in terms of what you can get even from 1 cup of tea. That's why I always let my tea steep long. I keep it in there. I don't take my tea bag out. I want it to be very dense and bitter and astringent, whatever the properties of that tea are, because that often correlates to the medicinal compounds in those teas. But Alejandro, what do you like?
I like tulsi tea, and tulsi is the mother herb of India, of Ayurvedic medicine, and is not only helpful in terms of antioxidants and in terms of the functions of helping and supporting the functions of detoxification, but is also even radio protective. It protects you from radiation, from EMFs. I mean, wow. it has anti-cancer properties. The list goes on and on. We don't even have time to go through it.
Oh, well, we got to look that one up. Ellen, you writing it down?
I just wrote it down. So a couple of things, you know, there's so many things to talk about, I think, when we're talking about nutrition, and I'll try to organize my thoughts. And I've read Dr. Junger's book. I think one thing is the idea around nutrition and eating healthy and clean is sometimes thought as unattainable, as elitist, right? Which is why the beginning of this conversation was so important, because we do need to demystify that or get that label off of, you know, clean eating, fasting, eating a whole food, plant-based diet is not a thing of elitism. And I love the way Alejandro started the conversation, because he talked about his heritage and where he comes from. And I think that might be a good introduction to, if we all just thought about our grandparents, our great-grandparents, wherever you live, wherever you come from, where your grandparents came from, if you start to think about the way they ate in their native land or when they first came here. I grew up in a very working class neighborhood in Boston with a lot of Italian immigrants, and everybody had a garden. Everybody had chickens, everybody had rabbits. And that inspired me to have a garden for my kids. But I think that's a sort of relatable way to think about getting back to what's natural, right? The idea of clean eating and organic food isn't some elitist idea. It truly just is simplifying our lives and getting back to the way our grandparents, our great grandparents ate and the things they prepared for us.
Ellen, I couldn't agree with you more, but we have gone so much down the rabbit hole that we're going to need an overhaul of many systems, including the financial systems and food production, food distribution systems. Because, for example, I was watching Andrew Zimmerman's Who's Eating America, or What's Eating America, is a TV show. And he was going in inside America, in middle America. He was going to places where people buy food, and there is not real food available. There's
right.
no fruits, and everything is packaged. So
right.
these people, even though it's not an elitist idea of eating healthy, if you don't have access to it, then it is, right? So I agree with you. We need to change the mind, but we need to change also our political and financial and food providing and selling systems, so that we are able to everybody's able to have access to real food.
Because there's a direct correlation with people who are poor and their comorbidities. It's a direct correlation to what they have access to. Their only choice sometimes is medicine versus healthier eating. And that's the hard part, is that they're the ones that need it the most.
And that's why what Dr. Minich said is so important. What can you do?
Right.
What can you do to empower yourself and make small changes? Growing herbs in your kitchen, at your window, teas. These are things that are little changes that if people just empowered themselves and implemented, they may start to feel the difference, and it will lead them further down a path, perhaps.
And there's one thing that I think is important that we shouldn't forget, but because it's not just about what people can do, but what people can stop doing that also will give them an advantage. And for example, everybody talks about breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and you should have the biggest meal is your breakfast, and eat, have breakfast like a king, and dinner like a mendicant, right? Like a beggar, right? But I believe that breakfast, lunch, and dinner is what's killing humanity, because we are not designed by nature to constantly eat and constantly digest. And that's why now there's this emergence of fasting and intermittent fasting. And just to make it simple for people, skipping meals can be a huge benefit to your health.
Well, I want to comment on that though, Alejandro, because I do think that this is the era of personalized nutrition. And truly, not everybody is going to fare well doing intermittent fasting in the way that you're describing. Some people are undernourished, or they have a lot of stress where their nutrient needs are greater. So I do think that what you're saying is absolutely valid. We need to look at the quantity, the quality, and the frequency at which we're eating. But then we also need to keep that in the personalized context, like back to the fast living and fast eating. If we're doing that all the time, we may actually need a bit more to rev our metabolic engine, so to speak, right? So I'm one of those people. I don't find it very easy to do a fast. I'm very metabolic. I'm fast running. I know that my liver is a quick metabolizer. I wouldn't do necessarily well, and I've tried different things. And so I just want to put that out there to everybody, that this is really important to move away from a diet, move away from generalized principles, and look at you, because that's what functional medicine is. And you and I, Alejandro, we know this, we're on the same page, but I think what we're speaking to here is, what can most people do? Like Ellen said, what's a small thing that we can do? I'm just thinking, like, drink more water. Drink more water.
Also, to get back to, what Dr. Junger mentioned earlier in our commercial systems. And if we think about why we eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner, it was really because food became a piece of a capitalist society, right? American diets are the worst because America is a capitalist society, and selling eggs and selling bacon and selling products and big agriculture it became a way for people to make money, and regardless of, you know, the side effect of making everybody sick, they've ingrained for decades in people that you need a big breakfast, you need to eat lots of animal products, eggs and dairy and meat, and that just isn't true. So if we think about the context of where it started, it really started so they could make money from people selling food. It wasn't really about health at all, which I would love at some point to talk about why the food in hospitals, I think we all know the answer, but why the food in hospitals is so bad.
Well, because it's a for-profit industry, and all they care about is cutting costs and you know, and making it, streamlining it, like you know, like a supermarket, because the cafeterias in the hospitals don't have their own chefs and that come up with their own menus. Everything comes prepackaged so that you can heat it up and serve it fast. It's literally fast food, a little more sophisticated, but literally fast food.
I mean, if not worse, honestly, because I have patients all the time, and especially when you have patients that are from certain areas, like I've had an Indian patient before, Hindu, and they asked for vegan diets, non-dairy, and that was very hard to get for them. And it's something that I think is a tragedy, because you have people coming in that are diabetic and have certain dietary needs that would 100% benefit them, but they have no resources to get it. And the diet of hospitals is literally, I think, even worse than fast food restaurants, because they don't, at least fast food sometimes tastes good, like, you know, so.
Dr. Minich mentioned water, and I had a hospital stay a couple of years ago, and I was really taken, and I just sat there and sort of watched everything, because it was very interesting for me to be really on the inside and sit there and see how everybody worked and how everything worked. And I noticed, you know, pain management people came in, and doctors come in, and nurses would come in, and they're all fantastic. But at the end of one day, I said to one of my nurses, nobody's asked me at all, the whole time I've been here, how much water I've had today. And I had, because I'm, you know, really about this nutrition life, I had my own alkaline water by my bedside. And she just stopped. And she said, you're right. We don't ever ask anybody how much water they've had. And I guess you don't need to if you can charge the insurance companies for bags of saline, right? And patients are being hydrated that way. They would much rather charge you or your insurance company for a bag of saline than they would to make sure you've had water. But it was in that moment that I realized that healthcare workers themselves aren't taught to talk about nutrition to patients. And that's another area.
Well, Ellen, I think you just nailed it, because, you know, what Alejandro was saying about the cafeteria and the hospital, if we look at the root cause of why don't hospitals embrace good, healthy food, and back to what Sheena was saying as well, and even dietary prescriptions for individuals who have certain religious or ethical concerns, I think that the root cause would be that the medical establishment does not embrace food as medicine. If they did, that nurse would be asking you about your food intake and about your water intake. And because there is no training of medical doctors, as Dr. Junger can tell you in med school, because they don't get that training, it's not infiltrated in the belief system. So then the whole medical system is not built upon food is medicine, nutrition. It's just not seen as important. So the structures that are built around that will not embrace it or cultivate practice.
I finished 8 years of medical school and 6 subsequent years of training in internal medicine and cardiology without anybody explaining to me what a healthy meal looks and tastes like. It was all about content of carbohydrates and proteins, and yeah, we talked about vitamins, but all as separate entities. Nobody taught me what a healthy meal looks like.
And I had a patient one time who had a really bad cough and she was not feeling well. She was on oxygen and I gave her medication for a cough and I called respiratory to help her out and that didn't work for her. So I ended up making her hot tea with lemon and honey because I know of honey as a natural cough suppressant. I love tea. I drink tea all day. And of course, lemon is good too. So I made her 2 cups. She loved it. She asked for more. The next 2 days later, I was called by my supervisor saying that I didn't take care of the patient. So I think that when it comes down to it, in those type of settings, people don't see that. They thought of that as like, you didn't take care of the patient, you didn't do what you were supposed to do. Meanwhile, me and the patient both agreed that she felt better after the tea. But that goes to show you how we don't see food as medicine. Even I've gone to the doctors before and said, oh, well, I'd rather hold off on that medication. I'm going to try this. And they were like, oh yeah, that's not going to work. So we're just going to give you this medication. It's like, wait, hold on. You're not even trying to hear that food is possibly medicine, that I can try other things first and see if it works, So it's a shame.
It is a shame. And, many people say that my doctor doesn't believe in nutrition. And I often say back to them, nutrition is not a belief system. It's a science. And it often takes about 50 years to translate the scientific research into clinical care. And that's problematic. We need to shorten that window so that people can get adequate care because the research is available on nutrition. I mean, we've been studying human nutrition since the 1920s, and we have a wealth of information. And obviously, sometimes too much and very conflicting, but sometimes that's because of the nature of how it was studied. But it's out there. It's not a belief system. It's common sense. We don't even need scientific studies galore in order to advocate that food is healing.
It really comes down to like respect for the organism that our human body is and how incredible a system it is, because people will go on diets all day long for their, because their ego is telling them that they need to look better or they need to be smaller. But if we skip meals or we watch what we eat, it's all ego driven. It's never out of respect for this machine that we're so blessed to have and how we should be treating it and how we should be looking at it and how we should be trying to love ourselves.
I love that point, Ellen, especially because so many people look to the outside. They look to a book, they look to an expert, and they're not trusting their own inner body messages, kind of like, when am I hungry? Do I just do the staple 3 meals a day with 2 snacks? Or do I listen to my body and I go with my rhythm, which might change every day a little bit? And I think it's the same with the pandemic. So many people are looking on the outside, trying to avoid the virus. It's all about what's out there. Let's do more sanitization. But what about the internal milieu? What about the empowerment and the choices that we have, and starting to shift that so that we have a better milieu and respond better and we don't have to have so much fear? And I think it's a balance of both, the external and the internal. But just like you're saying, we haven't done enough work on the internal. Everything is always out there. There's a diet out there. I call it the shiny object syndrome, SOS, where people are always looking for like the next diet. They read a book, now they want the next book. What's the latest diet? What should I be doing now? It's like, oh, wait a minute, let's pause and see what you need specifically and start listening to your body.
And Deanna, if we would have done that, within weeks, we would have put the whole country in such a better place. We would have avoided tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of deaths. Because the other aspect that people don't think about is that you start getting healthier after 1 or 2 meals. You don't have to wait 2 years to get healthy. Maybe the weight loss and that aspect takes a longer time. But your physiology and your metabolism respond to each morsel of food that you put in your mouth. Things start changing. So within 1 or 2 meals, you can get healthier responses, and you can make your body healthier and healthier responses to the virus itself.
I love that. And there are so many studies showing that one meal has lasting effects, just like you're saying. So that's why people say, well, Deanna, isn't it okay that I just have this one fast food meal? But that fast food meal leads to behaviors within the next 4 to 6 hours that might be inflammatory and reactive, and you may not make the best choices. So then you're on this, it's kind of like a wheel, and you got to get off the wheel. Just one meal can get you off of that inflammatory wheel.
Right. And I just question, how do you think that people can change their diet in simple ways to help them avoid COVID-19? Because I'm sure that's something that many people are going to ask themselves when watching this. Like, what would you say? I've heard turmeric. I've heard of so many different types of things that we can try. So,
well, there's two main aspects of your question, right? One is how it relates to food, what to eat, what not to eat, and the other one is what supplements you should help your diet with, right? And there's many supplements that are known to have a beneficial effect on not only the immune response, but specifically the antiviral immune response. And the Institute for Functional Medicine has put out really clear guidelines of which these supplements are and the studies behind them. And, you know, just to name a few: quercetin, B vitamins, vitamin C, zinc. There's a whole vitamin D, one of the most important ones. So there's a whole host of supplements. But in terms of food, I think that the most important thing would be to tell people to eat real foods and not food-like products. And just with that simple instruction, you can make everybody's life so much better.
Sheena, you know what I would say to that? First of all, I love what Dr. Junger just said, and I would agree, but supplements are the last resort. I think if you don't have a good foundation, you need that food as foundation. You know, food is information. Every time you eat, you're informing your cells, you're informing your genes. So do you want to feed your cells this kind of inflammatory message? So what I would say is I want to look at sugar for a minute, because this is something I'm drawn to personally. I have a sweet tooth. Many Americans have a sweet tooth, and it's the thing that keeps us in dysfunction. I have a nutritionist who trained me when I was in clinic, and she said, Deanna, look for the thing that is most difficult for people to let go of, because that's probably the thing that's keeping them in dysfunction. And if I looked at what people had a hard time letting go of, it was always something sweet, or it was salty, but there was this predominance of sweet. And we get too much sugar, we get added sugars. I'm not talking natural sugars and fruit. I'm talking about the processed sugars, and that dampens the immune system. That causes inflammation, which makes your body work poorly when it comes to your immune response. Like, even if we could just make it simple and say, like, less sugar, more fiber, right there, that's huge.
Right.
There's a ripple effect with every dietary change, right? And just focusing on sugar, and even shifting over, and maybe people say, well, I can't make that change. And I'll say, well, what about a ripe banana? What about dates? When I was growing up and I couldn't have sugar, my mom would say, have a date. And like, I'd want something really sweet. And she's like, well, the date should satisfy that, or have a piece of fruit. And so that's what I focus on now is fruit, stevia, monk fruit. There are all kinds of these different options. Most Americans don't understand the power of what sugar is doing to their bodies.
Right.
Yeah, I agree with the beginning of your answer, which is you cannot supplement your way out of a bad diet. Yeah. That's for sure. But if you do complement it with a good diet, supplements can be very helpful.
And I also think it's about trying to find what works for you. I'm a night shift nurse. I'm a mom. I have several businesses. So one thing that I felt like was easy for me was juicing. So I bought a juicer, and I would juice, and I got 3 or 4 glass containers, and I would make 3 containers full of juice. I would drink 1 before my shift, 1 around like 8, 9 p.m., and then 1 around like 1 or 2 a.m. And that would hold me for the rest of my shift. And then my next time eating would be in the morning. And it was really hard to say no to the donuts and the things that people buy us and the little treats and the vending machine, especially when you're sleepy. When you're sleepy as a nurse or a doctor, the first thing you do is grab something sweet to help wake you up. But truthfully, it just makes you more tired. So it really worked for me. I lost weight. I felt better. My body seemed like it cleansed better. It worked better. So I think it's also about finding the little tweaks that you can make a habit, because if you do anything for enough time, it becomes a habit. But when you try to change everything at once, just flip over a new leaf, sometimes it's a lot harder. So I think it's the little things that could help, just starting something new.
By the way, I feel for you, because nurses have to confront these tempting gifts that people send them, and I don't know why they send them the worst crap, as you said, bagels and muffins.
If they sent us an orange, we'd probably be offended. So I'm not mad at that, you know. So I'm not mad at that at all. I get why people send it. We do eat it. We love it. But I know that it's all nurses, but especially night shift workers, period, whether you're a nurse or not. Night shift workers in general have horrible diets. It's just a thing. Our bodies have no sleep-wake cycle. We crave sugar like nobody's business. So it's definitely something that I feel like we need to work on, but it's just not an easy task at all. For those nurses that I see eating carrots and hummus, I'm like, more power to you, sis. You know, it's not easy.
Well, if we're looking for tips, one of the things I'd like to see for nurses and even in the hospital is if you were to have something sweet, let's just say that you entertained a donut that was on that table left for you. If you were to have something that was protein or fat containing with that donut, you would offset the huge spike of sugar that goes into your blood. So if you had a handful of now I'm not justifying having that donut. All I'm saying is it's about eating smarter, right? And if you are not at the place in your behavior change process where you could say, Deanna, I'm getting off of sugar, then eat smarter. So if you're going to have something sweet, have something with protein so that you blunt that response.
And this is so important because, like I said, I think the most intimidating part about eating healthy is people feel like it's a whole life change. And it is. But I think that the point is start where you can. Don't think that like, okay, tomorrow I'm going to wipe my whole refrigerator. I'm going to do this. No, start where you can. If you go on a vacation, you want to eat, go eat. You know, it's about finding ways to make it your own and those baby steps. I know when I stopped eating meat heavily, eventually my body reacted to that. And then I didn't want it anymore. So it comes with those baby steps that go. And then now I'm more of a pescatarian. So I think it's more so about just finding your own wave. So one other question I have, go ahead, Dr. Junger.
No, but I just wanted to add something. Whatever you said right now, I agree 100%. And small changes are good and they can help a lot of people, especially people that are very busy and cannot divert their attention to overhauling their health, right? But there is something to be said about doing something intensely and really drastic for a period of time. And this is why I wrote my first book, Clean, about a 3-week detox program, because I found out that it was much easier for people to succeed when they abandon sugar, gluten, dairy, coffee, and alcohol all together than trying to abandon one at a time. Because when you're on all these things, you take one because of you trying to counteract the effect of the other. Let's say you eat a bagel, you have a sugar high, then your sugar comes down. You, in order to revamp yourself, maybe you have a cup of coffee. So you're having coffee to compensate for something that you had before and that brought you down. And when you take away the coffee, then it becomes even more difficult than when you take everything out altogether and stop having to compensate from one thing for another. Right. So yes, I agree with you for the most part, but there is something to be said for drastic changes for a period of time that people, find difficult at the beginning for 2-3 days, but then they fly. And I've seen this all over the world with thousands of people.
Right. I think drastic change is going to give you drastic results.
Right.
And a little change at a little bit of time is going to give you a little bit of results. So if you think about it that way, maybe it's easier.
And let's talk about mental health, because I know that this is something that people don't think about. But how do you think that eating plant-based or drinking more water or just having a better overall nutrition affects the mental health? Because I don't think a lot of people know that. So if you would help us with that.
Well, I'll start with a simple concept, and then I let Deanna expand on it, right?
Okay.
Mental health, right, in part is about the hardware, the brain, the nervous cells. And I say only in part, right? But that part is really important. It's like the hardware of your computer. And in order to have that hardware working at optimal levels and fulfilling optimal functions, you have to provide for it everything that it needs. So the right nutrients and you know, vitamins, minerals, proteins, fats, everything that those cells need in order to function are very important. And then I also take away the things that will hinder or that would bring that function down, like oxidative stress, inflammation, right? So you creating the conditions for that hardware to work correctly. There's also the aspect of the software, right? The thinking process. Most people are thinking all the time, and they find themselves thinking thoughts that they don't even choose to think. So, but for that aspect, you know, we're talking about meditation, exercise, and things that bring you to the present. So we have the hardware and the software aspect, and I know, Deanna, you have a lot to say about both of them, but in terms of nutrition and brain function, this is something that you taught me about. So I'm going to give you the microphone.
Well, I love what you said. That was a great analogy of hardware and software. You know, when I reflect on it, I feel like people don't want to be healthier. They want to be happier. And the way to get to happiness often means being healthy. So, you know, they often set out on that path of health, but the ultimate goal and the root cause is to have a better quality of life, right? And so when I do detoxification programs with people, one of the things that I noticed very early on when I was doing nutritional protocols was that when somebody changed their eating, they changed their living. It was like they became a different person. They became sometimes less depressed, less anxious, less worry-minded. It's almost like they cleared the noise, like the background noise of their lives, so that they could quit their job and actually set out and do what they really wanted to do, or they ended a relationship, or they moved to a different state or country. I found so many overhauls for people when they did a detox because they just got clear, right? And it wasn't just clear in the gut because they got different nutrients. The gut is often perceived as the first brain. It's the primal brain. And if you change the gut with what's coming into the gut, as Alejandro was saying, with all of the different nutrients, you're going to change the brain signals because most of the nervous system is going from the gut up. It's not the brain down, it's the gut up. So when we take care of our food, it takes care of our mood. And the science would suggest that, and I'm going to revert back to plants because I'm always looking at what is the common denominator, whether you're keto, paleo, vegan, vegetarian, omnivore, whatever you are. The common denominator of where we see the best mood is with fruits and vegetables. It just is. There's an association between eating plants, specifically fruits and vegetables, and better mood, better quality of life, less psychological distress, better mental health, even better creativity, which is interesting. When people can get creative, they feel more free in their lives. They have more flow in their lives. So there's a huge relationship between them. In fact, that's why I created a food and mood tracker so that people can look at the colors of their food and the colors of their mood. So are they feeling particularly blue? Well, maybe they're not eating enough blue-purple foods, which there's science to support eating blue-purple for brain function and even mood. So there's a lot there, but I think that's pretty, that's the gist of it. When people are feeling well.
And you touched on something only briefly, but it's hugely important. And it's the, you know, you said that the gut is the first brain, right? A lot of people are talking about it as the second brain, but it is the first brain. It is the first brain in orders of appearance in our evolution. And it also is the first brain in terms of how much they contribute to your mood. Because 80% of your serotonin, which now we know correlates with mood and overall sensation of happiness, the serotonin is mostly produced in the brain, in the gut. So mental health is not really commonly thought as gut health, but it should be. And if we do that, we're going to give those people that suffer from mental health a huge advantage.
Absolutely. And just to go back to water for a second, I don't know why water is coming up for me a lot in this discussion, but there are even studies showing that mild dehydration leads to cognitive issues. And most people don't think, am I dehydrated? They just eat something else that's different, right? So I love what you're saying about the gut. It's so true. There's so many things if we think of this trajectory, right? Like, are we eating colorfully? Are we attending to our gut? Because where do most people feel their stress and mental health issues? It's actually in their belly. And Alejandro, you had irritable bowel syndrome. I mean, look at the name of that, irritable bowel. There's an emotional component that goes along with the physiological component. I had it too. The only difference with me is that I also had reproductive issues. And for women with reproductive issues like endometriosis, or any number of different things, that's an inflammatory based condition that often shares a condition with the gut. And so for me, it was
because not only 80% of the serotonin and the brain in the gut being a much bigger brain in terms of the number of neurons than the one in the brain, but also the immune system, 78 to 80% of your immune system lives within and around the gut.
Yep. Absolutely.
It's something that I think that we even bypass as people is, I tell people that I'm lactose intolerant and they'll say, oh, I'm good with dairy. And I say, but are you? Because most of the time we're so used to feeling bad that we don't even know that what we're feeling is that. Like, we're used to feeling gassy. We're used to maybe only having a bowel movement once every 2 or 3 days. We don't even know that that's not good. So a lot of times when I tell people, no, I don't do dairy, or I try to stay away from it in portions, they're like, oh, I'm fine. And it's like, but you aren't. These things, we're so used to functioning at this level that we don't realize that. And I'm such a huge advocate for detoxing and just minimizing some things in our diet. And it's unfortunate that in hospitals, even when we have people with irritable bowel syndrome, Crohn's, chronic things that obviously affect the gut, we still give them the same diet. It's still not any change in the way that we feed them, even though they're literally stooling into a bag because of how terrible their gut has become. So it's definitely something that we need to take inventory of how we feel after we eat certain items, take inventory of the energies that we're getting from a lot of our foods and what we're eating and how it's affecting us.
Absolutely. And everybody has a different motivator to change, right? If somebody stays with that baseline, and what Alejandro was saying before about a radical change, when they go through a detox or a cleanse and they get a different baseline, then they realize, wow, there's such a gap. Right. And I think for some people, it's their skin. For me, it was always as a teenager, just feeling like I had bad skin. And so you see that every day. And then it's like, I got to do something about that, right? Or for other people, it's pain in their body. Like they're tired of having hip pain and they can't walk right. My dad was like that. He did my detox, just a very simple elimination diet. Within 9 days, like almost 50% of his hip pain had gone away, which he found it really hard to believe. But there's this whole aspect of allergy, inflammation from food. And people don't realize that this is real and it can be reversed.
and one more thing for women, right? The inability to get pregnant. And how when your body is turning on all these adaptation and survival mechanisms, inflammation being one of them, the body says, wait a minute, if I have to do all these things, if I'm fighting off inflammation right now, why on earth would I allow the pregnancy to happen? So a lot of women cannot get pregnant. They do a sound detox or cleanse, and they end up getting pregnant by the end of it. I've seen so many of them.
Yeah.
I think another thing to mention in support of a more severe cleanse, sorry to use that word severe, but is absorption, right? Because again, we can make small changes, but what is our absorption level? And we can stay at this sort of making small changes and incorporate healthier foods. And this is a huge topic in one that may be too broad to cover itself, but I think certainly those of us in nutrition who realize that our food is lacking nutrients because our soil is lacking nutrients because of the, commercial pesticides and everything. So even if you try to eat healthy, how much nutrition does that food actually have? So can you speak a little bit about that?
And by the way, even if you eat the most nutritious food, and if your intestinal wall and the immune system around it and the nervous system around it is not actually functioning properly, and let's say there's mucus retention and therefore water retention, and the body and the absorption even of the highest nutrient quality food is not going to be as good as when those processes calm down. So yes, really important that when you have an inflamed intestine, if you keep on doing small changes, they may not mount to much, and they may not mount to enough to get you inspired to continue them. Because if you're just getting very small benefits, you have a bad day, they go out the window. But if you have a period of 3 weeks that you are determined, and you do a big jump in your feeling well, then you'll be more likely to stick with it later on, because then you realize, oh my God, how much better I feel. Then if you start doing little things 3 weeks later, you may not have even any results.
It's true. Sometimes I want to talk about the 5R approach in functional medicine, but before I do, because I think that that'll kind of put it in like a path approach of what people could do. But I also want to reflect on what Ellen said about, yes, the nutrients in the soil are reduced, right? Even if people make really good, healthy decisions, they also have additional stresses in their lives that are impairing digestion and absorption. And what about chewing? We're drinking a lot of our food these days. Not that drinking is bad, but I often tell people to chew their smoothies. And most people don't realize this. And I've learned this from a functional dentist that I teach with, Dr. Mary Ellen Chalmers, that your dentition and your chewing, this is called mastication. When you are chewing repeatedly, you're actually stimulating the nerve fibers underneath the teeth that then stimulate the brain. So chewing stimulates cognitive abilities. And if we are lacking chewing, we're impairing digestion, we're impairing our ability to get those nutrients into the body. And there's a cephalic or a head brain component of something as simple as chewing. So dentition is part of nutrition. The 5R process in functional medicine to get the gut on right is, first and foremost, remove the offenders. Like if you have microbial overgrowth or yeast in the gut, get that taken care of. The second one is replace. Some people, as they get older or they're stressed, they start missing out on stomach acid or pancreatic enzymes, just the basics of what breaks your food down, even bile. The third one is to re-inoculate. So sometimes we need healthy microorganisms and we've got, again, dysbiosis or an imbalance in the gut. The fourth one is to repair the gut lining. And Dr. Junger talked about that already. There are certain nutrients like zinc and vitamin A that are really helpful for getting the gut lining, which looks like a shag carpet, like back into motion. And then the fifth one is rebalance. And rebalance is all about stress. Like I just talked with a gastroenterologist like the other week, and it's beautiful because he can see that it's not just, gastroenterology is not a functional, just a biochemical structural organ anymore. He now sees that he needs to talk with the patient about their life and about their stresses, because it's the fifth one out of the 5R. It's the rebalance. It's pivotal, just like the enzymes are, to really focus on that rebalance element.
And who's more stressed right now than our healthcare workers?
Yeah,
absolutely.
Can't even tell you. But so just to make this as simple as possible for people that are watching, if I go into the grocery store, is it color that I'm looking for when I'm picking out the vegetables and the fruits that are the best? Should I be looking at the fruits and vegetables that have the most color, or is there another trick to this?
So as much as possible, look for real foods that you would find in the wild if you were living in the wild. So that means avoiding in the supermarket all the middle of the supermarket where the aisles are, and going to the periphery of the supermarket where the, you know, the produce and maybe the fish. And so that is really important. But the other aspect is one aspect that I actually learned from Deanna as well, which is to eat the rainbow. And just as you benefit from, you know, biodiversity of good microorganisms in the gut, you also will benefit and you will maximize your chances of have the right biodiversity of microorganisms in the gut if you have biodiversity in your diet, which a simple way of thinking about it is eating the rainbow. And Deanna, take it on.
You nailed it. I mean, that one of my books is The Rainbow Diet, right? And I wanted to make it very simple, like what can most people do? So yes, to eating more colorful foods. Some people laugh and tongue in cheek will say, oh, does that mean like I can have my candy? And, you know, no, it's the colorful whole plant-based foods. But aside from that, you know, because I think that is really important. I do think that there's a color code to nature. So I've written a scientific paper on this in the Journal of Nutrition and Metabolism, where I talk about how red foods are about inflammation, orange foods are about fertility and the fat tissue in our body. Yellow is about digestion, green is about cardiovascular, and blue purple is about the brain. So there was a survey that was done some years ago, and basically it found that 88% of Americans do not get their daily allotment of blue purple foods. It's precious, right? It's the color that we need for the brain, for the mind, for mood, for memory. And yet we're really opting out. So I often tell people, whenever you see purple, buy it. It's precious. I live in the Pacific Northwest, and so we get purple broccoli here. We get purple kale here. And it's pretty, it's a good deal. So every time I see that in the grocery store, yeah, I'm choosing that. If I see purple carrots, I'm going to take those over the orange carrots.
There's purple cauliflower.
There's purple cauliflower. Absolutely. Oh, and it's so beautiful when you start to steam it. I do
count.
What is it? Does it color
count?
Which one?
Eggplant.
Eggplant. Oh yeah, eggplant counts. The skin is purple. Yes, and in fact, you just made me think of a really good point, and that is the skin of a food is where most of those phytonutrients hang out. So with an eggplant, you want the skin. Some people peel their apples, they peel their cucumbers. It's like, no. You need the peel. The peel is where that plant had to protect itself from the environment, and it started to create all of these really healthy compounds for us. The other thing I want to bring out, aside from the rainbow, is variety. I am huge into variety. I just made an Instagram post about showing my lunch, and I counted up the number of plants in my lunch, and it was 31. And I want people to get to like 50 unique plants in a week, even if they could do that, because you know what, most Americans, they cycle amongst like, I think it's 10 to 20 different type of plant-based foods. They're in a rut. And many times when they're in a food rut, they're in a life rut, right? They're just moving through the motions of life. They're not inspired. They're not aware. They're not present. And so the key is variety. 50 unique plant-based foods in 7 days.
Deanna, you once told me that in previous generations we used to eat up to 3,000 different plants, and now we're eating up to 300 only. Can you remind me of that?
Well, you got it. And I also, I'm posting a lot lately on variety because I feel like people are in ruts. They're at home. They need to be inspired, right? And so, yes, there was a paper. There were 2 papers. One said that the ancestral diet, and they didn't cite a time frame. So that's the only thing to consider here. But in general, the ancestral diet encompassed something like 3,000 different plants. And our current diet is between 100 to 300. And some people would even say down to 20 plants. And I would even say for everybody listening, just take a meal. Like when you go to cook tonight, when you have your meal, just count up all the plants. And I do this with my friends. I have a text thread where we were counting up like all of our, even my husband, he was like, okay, I've got 14. And yes, it's kind of a fun activity, even when you're not trying. And one of the best ways to get those plants is to include spices. And the only way I got to 31 in that meal was I used 3 different spice blends. I used an Indian, a Japanese one, And I think the other one was more of just like a herb de Provence, right? So even though they were kind of disparate blends, I was like, I need to maximize my diversity in this meal, because diversity, like Alejandro was saying, confers a better microbiome. When you have a better microbiome, you have a better brain. When you have a better brain, you have a better life. So diversity is not just a food concept. I see it as a collective societal issue. And the micro of the meal represents the macro of our society. That's just how I see it. And we need more diversity.
By the way, the diversity in variety of plants also will have implications in global warming and agriculture and the health of the planet. Because if you're only doing monocultures of 30 plants, and you have thousands and thousands of miles, square miles of land used to raise one type of plant, that plant is going to have less nutrients, is going to be more susceptible to insects, so it's going to need more insecticides and pesticides, and that is a vicious circle that is really ruining on our planet. So the more variety, the better the planet will be, not only your body.
That's so beautiful. That's such a macro concept too. And I think for everybody to know that if you eat more variety, you actually tend to be better in your nutritional status. There are studies on that. So if you eat a more diverse diet, your chances of filling your requirements on nutrients will be greater. There are also functional markers. Kids tend to get less allergy when they eat a more diverse diet earlier on. There are so many different, I did a whole presentation once just on the benefits of dietary diversity and how important it is for our overall health. So even if people can't buy all of the rainbow, fruits and veggies, I would say just shake it up. Every week, buy a new food that you haven't had in a while. Like I just bought a fennel bulb. When was the last time I had fennel? Not for a very long time. So it's like, I want to see those nutrients again. Like, let's bring them in. And it keeps me more resilient and creative with my meal making too.
My grandfather used to eat fennel. He was Italian, and he used to eat fennel as a digestive every night after his dinner. And so I eat fennel because I grew up watching my grandfather eat it. It's true. I don't think people think, I certainly don't. I mean, I use a lot of spices in my cooking, but I have never before this conversation thought of spices as plants. Mm-hmm. Even though I know they are, I'm not necessarily thinking of that when I cook, and that's a great reminder. Yeah. Could you talk about, and this again is maybe going a little bit deep into people who are really into nutrition, but I have two brilliant minds here, so I'm gonna be selfish for a second. And I'd like to know what the two of you think about, Sheena mentioned eggplant, and certainly everyone has heard of like athletes' diets and nightshades, right? And nightshades and their relationship to inflammation. We've talked a lot about inflammation in this conversation. And I would love to know, or love for you to just talk about your opinion about nightshades and what they are, and if you believe that they contribute to inflammation and are harmful. And similarly to that, how you feel about fungus and mushrooms.
So there's this concept. There's this concept in holistic medicine, in functional medicine, even in spirituality, that no stress is not good. No gravity is no good. We wouldn't be sticking to the floor. No stress is no good. No inflammation is no good. Inflammation, everybody has to understand, is actually a survival mechanism. It's very similar in chemistry and because it's a cascade of reactions to coagulation. Coagulation or blood clotting is a survival and defense mechanism. If you don't coagulate, you can bleed to death. If you don't get inflamed, you don't activate your defense system and your repair systems. So inflammation is not an enemy, but if inflammation goes from being localized to being all over, to being systemic, that is when, in chronic, that is when a survival mechanism turns against you, right? So we have to understand that that inflammation depends on many, many different things. And there are nutrients that are pro-inflammatory, and there are nutrients that are anti-inflammatory. When somebody is healthy as a baseline, it's great to have both pro-inflammatory and anti-inflammatory. Of course, in the right proportions according to nature's design, right? So eggplants for a healthy person are great, but for somebody that's either inflamed, too inflamed already, especially in their joints, eggplants and nightshades have a nutrient called solanine, which actually kind of intensifies an aspect of inflammation, especially the aspect of, that deals with inflammation of the joints. So I take nightshades out when people are doing a detox program, or when people are dealing with arthritis or other inflammatory processes. But in general, I don't take any foods out of the picture because they may cause inflammation, because some stress is good for the body.
And that would make sense why the blue zones, where people live the longest, can eat nightshades, tomatoes, eggplant, the Italians, the Sicilians, the Greek.
Yeah. And then you have a whole other aspect, which is what Dr. Gundry talks about in his books, you know, the plant paradox, which is the content of lectins, right? And when you look at cultures that eat those things that are healthy, when you see the way they prepare them traditionally, you see that they reduce the amount of negative aspects of each food, either by peeling them or cooking them or preparing them in a certain way with certain other ingredients. Deanna,
First of all, I love this question because it's the #1 question I get from people, because I do advocate a plant-based diet. So then people always come back and say, what about the lectins, the goitrogens, the oxalates, the phytates? What about phytoestrogens? Like, I get every reason in the book as to why they can't do fruits and vegetables. So I'm going to give you a blended scientific and clinical answer as to what I've seen in the clinic and also what I see in the science. In the clinic, I did see that some people did react. And it's not logical to think that people should be able to receive all foods at all times. It's just not. We're going to have different guts at different times, different rates of inflammation in the body. Like Alejandro said, sometimes our baseline is going to be higher. I do think it's not always the food, however. It could be that the food is signaling something inside the person that's not in balance. It's about 10 to 15% of people who have some kind of nightshade sensitivity. Ellen, you were asking what are the nightshades? Typically tomatoes and eggplant and peppers and chili peppers, potatoes. You know, I'm part Irish. And so, you know, I think about you've been mentioning ancestry and our lineage. And I think about, I'm not Italian. My husband is Portuguese and does really great on tomatoes, but I don't. You know, that's not in my ancestry. And I actually become like a tomato if I eat tomatoes. So I know it's like that I'm just not connecting to that particular food. And I think it's fine. Back to what Alejandro said as well. It is about how we prepare foods and how much we're eating and what are the heirloom varieties of tomatoes that were eaten in Europe versus what we have in the States. So there's that. But in general, what I saw clinically, and even Dr. Aristo Bajjani, who's an immunologist, one of the most brilliant immunologists I've ever met, he's actually done research on this and has found that when it comes to lectins, where people have a lot of concern, that ties into the eggplant and tomato discussion, that roughly, you know, there can be an immune response in some people, like that 10 to 15% roughly. I think it's a sign of looking at our physiology, honoring the body, honoring our ancestry, what have our genes seen over time, and also maybe these foods are more or less a messenger. You know, maybe we we have something in the gut wall, because lectins, there's a whole science around this, but basically it could be signaling this molecular mimicry, or we can be having an immune response. These foods might look similar to certain parts of our body, and we might have an immune reaction.
Do you want to talk just very quickly about what lectins are for maybe people who don't know and haven't heard about lectins?
Yeah, so they're a compound, glycolipids and a variety of different kind of larger compounds that are in these plants. And sometimes the plants make them in response to stress in their environments. So like with the oxalates and a lot of these, sometimes they're called anti-nutrients, which I don't like that term, but sometimes they're called anti-nutrients because people see them as offenders in plants. But again, if they're fermented, soaked, cooked at, proper durations, you can actually lessen the effects of these in people. And I think that's what's happening. People are making a lot of smoothies with a lot of these raw foods that normally, traditionally are not eaten raw. They're eaten cooked. And so why are we having an issue with all the kale and the goitrogenic activity and the goitrogens and thyroid? Well, is kale, all that kale, really meant to be taken in a raw form repeatedly every day in that high level? That's just not kind of, again, the ancestral way of how we've been eating through the generations.
So preparation.
But for people, for people to think about it simply, it's like these plants cannot move around. So if there's predators coming to eat them, they cannot defend themselves by moving away. So how do they defend themselves? By creating certain compounds that will make whoever eats them sick, right? Animals, right? So lectins are considered one of the ways in which plants defend themselves. Sorry to interrupt you, Ellen.
That's a good way to say it. And Alan, maybe we should talk about fungus too, because I have a strong view about that. Alejandro, I don't know if you want to chime in on.
A lot of people, and the reason why I wanted to mention it is because when you talk about a plant-based diet, these are the things that if I have conversations with people that I hear is mushrooms or fungus. People replace meat with mushrooms. So you can just replace, meat with mushrooms, and people say, well, what about the fungus? Or if you say, you can replace animal products with grains, quinoa has lectins. So I think as a whole approach to making changes in your diet, it's important to mention the red flags and excuses that people throw up as to why a plant-based diet is dangerous, or why they think.
Mm-hmm. And yes, Deanna, we would love to hear about the fungus.
The fungus among us. So me living in a very damp climate, again, in the Pacific Northwest, where it's very temperate in weather, and it doesn't get very cold. There's a lot of mold. There are a lot of mycotoxins. This is a huge discussion in functional medicine. And what I would say to this, and this borders into that mushroom discussion, is that, again, this gets back into detoxification. In the best of all possible worlds, our body needs to be primed to, when we take in mold from the environment, because we can't live in a glass bubble. We're always going to be interacting with the environment, right? And so the way that mold gets out of the body is basically through different compounds and different processes in the liver. And it involves that our bile is adequately formed and comes into the intestine. And many people don't have good liver function. They don't have proper bile flow. So we can't get these mycotoxins out. There are certain foods that tend to be higher in mycotoxins. There are certain environments that are higher in mycotoxins. Mold comes in many varieties. All it needs is fiber and water to grow. So you go into a library, you're going to smell mold. Why? Because there are books with paper, and that paper has sat over time through different temperature conditions. You've got mold. Clothing carries mold. Carpet carries mold. We are surrounded. So rather than have fear about the mold, let's focus on the internal part of the body and making sure that the liver and bile connection are working very well. And I do think that for some health practitioners out there, they advocate a no mushroom diet for people with yeast, candida, and any kind of sensitivity towards the whole class of microorganisms, MYCO, which refers to the mycelia, right? Kind of like this collective term for yeast and fungus. And so what they say is, well, why don't you stop eating those products so that your body doesn't get this subtle signal that something that looks like what's actually offending you. But again, I don't think we can do this long term. Certain mushrooms have medicinal properties like reishi and lion's mane and turkey tail. These are incredible for the brain, for a variety of different processes. So I think it's...
And let's not forget the mushrooms that are good for the spirit and for spiritual enlightenment, you know?
Yes, yes.
And I think Paul Stamets is really the guy to answer on all things mushroom. I don't know if you all know who Paul Stamets is, but he's in my neck of the woods in Washington, and he's a mushroom expert, right? He did a TED Talk. He does wide lecturing on all things mushroom, and I've learned a lot from listening to what he says about mushrooms and how they're leading the way. I mean, they're helping us on a variety of levels. I'd like to see packages made of mushrooms that, you know, mushrooms start to come into our medicine a bit more, and we get back to kind of the traditional uses of mycelia.
And I think something that if we wanted to sum up this whole thing, I would definitely say that one is that we, like you all said, nutrition is functional. So there's not one way for everyone, nor is there one way that's going to serve you for the rest of your life. There's going to be certain times where you're going to need certain nutritional practices and other times where you're going to need other practices. But I think what's largely important for the typical person who may not be as into nutrition is to try to see a holistic practitioner or a nutritionist, someone that can help you with that, because the typical doctor, typical nurse practitioner that you see in the office is not necessarily going to lead you that way, especially when you are actually sick and you want to use food as medicine. So I think that, like, if you go to a doctor and you tell them that, oh, I want to do plant-based and I want to do that, and they tell you, oh, no, that's not going to work. That's one moment, and I always listen to your practitioners on most things, but that's one moment to say, okay, I'm also going to see a nutritionist. I'm also going to see a holistic practitioner that can maybe steer me into different directions, or just talk to me about using food as medicine, because I've gone to holistic practitioners that said, stay away from lectins. I've gone to doctors who said, be vegan, that veganism isn't a thing. I've gone to people, holistic practitioners that also endorsed meat heavily. So it just really depends. And I think it's so important to see a variety of different people, listen to your own body, take those little steps, and to also think of nutrition as not something that just involves where you live. There are plenty of places and different websites where you can find some of the fruits. Like, I buy my soursop from a business called Divine Harvest Foods and she's amazing, and she gets all these tropical fruits from everywhere, and she sells them, and they come in a cooler package. And, you know, I'm sure it's so expensive for her to send it that way, but I appreciate everything that she does to make sure that people have different ways to get these fruits that are not in our grocery stores. So I think it's so important that we take a huge role in our health, realizing that health is wealth, health is medicine, health is our nutrition, and everything that we're doing is a huge part of survival. Go ahead, Dr. Junger.
And since we're giving people practical tips, right? You say see a holistic practitioner. Sometimes it's difficult, and sometimes, you know, there's not all holistic practitioners are equal, right? So a good place to start for people that want to enter this kind of care is to find a functional medicine practitioner. And you can easily do that by going to ifm.org and click on find a practitioner in your area.
And let me just give a disclaimer to that. Not all people who do a functional medicine course are qualified, in my opinion. You know, find somebody who's certified in functional medicine. That means that they've gone through the entire 2.5-year course or so, and they have some repository of baseline knowledge to get
Are the ones on ifm.org certified?
If you go to the website, which is, there are a couple, ifm.org, there'll be a tab that says find a practitioner. You put in your zip code and you can see all the practitioners. Now, these are practitioners that may have taken 1 course, 2 courses. you will get a list of everything that they've done. And I would say my preference is to go for somebody who has a certified functional medicine practitioner status.
Okay. Okay, because I want this talk to be for everyone. I want everyone from the Ellens who are everything nutrition to the Dr. Jungers who are diving into this, and for the people who live in New York City in a small apartment and have not a garden in sight, you know, so I want everyone to kind of be able to take something home from this, because I can't even tell you how simple sometimes these illnesses are. We make health so complicated when truthfully it's very simple. There's people that are living with cancer, arthritis, diabetes, who have made it a norm, that just think that they can never be well. So I think it's so important to take what you can from this conversation and realize that your health is very simple, and simple things like this can, and improving your health in food can be monumental to making you have a longer and healthier and better quality of life.
What an amazing way to wrap up, Sheena. That is, I agree.
Yeah.
So everything you said. And speaking of, and I intend to put a lot of links when I post this video for resources for people, everything that we've mentioned. And also Divine Harvest Foods. I will just close with saying sea moss is something that's so simple that you can get on Divine Harvest Foods. That is really a game changer for everyone I've introduced it to who had never heard of sea moss before. And I will provide a link to Divine Harvest Foods when I post this video. But it's simple changes that will probably make a world of difference for you. And we're so grateful to practitioners like you who through Instagram and social media have been on a mission to make this knowledge widely available and accessible to people, and who have dedicated your life to teaching and inspiring people to make changes in their life. We're very, very grateful to you both for taking the time to do that, because I know about both of you through social media and also your books, but I wouldn't have read the books had I not been introduced through social. So really grateful.
I hope people get a pen and paper before this one, Elle. This is a lot. No, really, it's information that could save your life. It's not one of those ones that you just you listen to and you're like, oh, that was nice. Look at Ellen and Sheena doing this. No, this is one that can really save your life. So we really
and we touched a lot. So yes. You know, we're happy to get back with you and go into more detail whenever you want.
Absolutely. We would love to have you again. So absolutely.
And not only, sorry to interrupt you, but I just wanted to touch on something you said. Not only save your life, but give you a better quality of life while we're here, right? None of us know how much time we have here, but let's make the time that we have here the best that it can be. And we want to feel the best and put out the best energy. No anger, no aggression. We want to be happy and live meaningful lives.
Absolutely. Thank you so much to both of you for giving us your time.
Amen.
Amen. Great to meet you both.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Nice spending time with you guys.
Likewise.
Right,
Thanks, Alejandro.
Bye.